Barbara's a geologist with more than 15 years. I told her that you should actually say only 15 years. Experience in mineral exploration from project generation to advanced project stage, encompassing targeting studies. Extensive experience in Canada and Australia with a focus on nickel sulfide and magmatic hydrothermal. It gets too complicated for me about there. She specialises in integrated mineral systems targeting. So that's really what she's going to talk about. So I'd like you to say good day to Barbara Duggan, who didn't realise it was being filmed and disappeared as soon as we said it was going to be filmed.
It's kind of cheeky. Okay, so I just want to point out first that there's everything that I'm presenting, none of this has been done with any artificial intelligence. This is all, I guess as I was told, old school geology, looking at plots, looking at data. It wasn't plugged into a computer to pop anything out. It's just looking at data. So I'm going to show you how using element anomalism can map out a new exploration target in a previously explored belt. The East Laverton project has previously been explored for nickel and gold. CSA Global identified a VMS signature in excess of 20 kilometers from drill data. And this presentation will show you how letting data speak for itself rather than being model-driven can identify a more likely target. So just the disclaimer. So I just want to thank St. George Mining for allowing me to present this data set again. The work being presented is from the interpretation that CSA completed, and it's currently being used for targeting purposes by the company. This is an interpretation of existing and historical data with all the data already in the public forum. There's no previously unreleased data in here, though the data might look a little different if you've ever looked at this project, because there's a lot of new additional historical work that's been included from paper copies of WAMX data. So the East Laverton project is located on the eastern margin of the Ilgorm Craton and has a thick Permian cover which increases to the east. Wow, that's cool right there. The project was a focus of exploration from 2010 to 2016. There was extensive nickel sulfide exploration which identified thick intervals of ultramafic along the Stella Range, which is this range right through here, predominantly from Cambridge down through to Windsor. But unfortunately, there was very little to no economic mineralization present. Gold exploration has been predominantly in the central and eastern areas, including Bristol, Athena, and Oxford. So in through here and then down along these feature. There has been difficulty associating the near surface and weathered gold mineralization to a bedrock source. Just something to note. So the aim of this project was to complete a litho-structural interpretation, which you can see this is the underlying map I'll use in through here. And we combined it with the data assessment based on a geologically validated database to determine if additional targets are present, particularly outside the nickel space. Part of this work included the addition of historic data from WAMX. A majority of this data is from the 70s, 80s, and very early 90s. There was a wealth of geological data that was available, but it was all in this very painful paper format. A big part of the data added was all the lithology logs. Often the historic data that gets added to a project is the collar, the survey, and a few assays that the geologist at the time feels suit the project. But often this misses a lot of the other assays. So people often do the gold and they'll put in the nickel, the copper, and the chrome, but they'll leave the zinc, the lead, the arsenic, the bismuth, the antimony out. And then when they put in the gold data, they often will say, well, yes, you analyzed it 3 times, but I'm going to average that and I'm going to put it in. So you don't actually capture well, this one sample had ran 700 ppm, and then 2, and then 4, and then you get this random average, and you don't know that throughout your whole project, you actually have ridiculously nuggety gold, because no one's actually captured multiple repeat assays for gold. So we fixed some of that, and with adding all the lithology information, we put in over 25,000 records so that we could actually capture regolith, transported material, and where we were lacking the geochemical information to attribute certain anomalous results, we could say whether that was in fresh rock or whether it was up in the regolith profile. So from this, from adding all this historic lithology information, what we were able to do is we were able to actually extend the outline of the greenstone belt. So we actually, with historic drill dating, we were able to prove basement material in areas down in through here. So we were able to extend it an extra 10 kilometers to the south, which was supported by the structural interpretation from MAG and some very dodgy regional gravity, and also extend the width of it from 2.5 kilometers wide at its most to about 6. Another significant highlight of this work is the element anomalism that is based on this lithogeochemical classification. As a result of this process, numerous targets were identified with anomaly maps generated in line with the mineral systems approach. So by using a mineral systems approach, the data can speak for itself rather than being tried to fit into a particular deposit style box. Since the majority of the data was targeting a nickel sulfide model, the data being assessed may not be actually in the best location for looking at the size and true extent of a hydrothermal system, but the data can give an indication of the presence of fluids and the size of a system. And this is important because an economic hydrothermal deposit has a large element and alteration halo on the orders of tens of to sometimes hundreds kilometers scale. The Lithogeochem interpretation presented here is focused at the camp scale, so I'm just going to look at magma series and metal anomalism. So I was actually able to identify prospective rock types and magma series, as well as alteration and metal anomalism. So as part of the project, a significant surface data was compiled. A bulk of this data is WMC, plutonic, and Dominion vintage with some Delta Gold and Savannah resources thrown in there. I would just want to note that all the red dots on this map indicate gold that's above 10 ppb. The story on gold for this area isn't finished yet, but where it has been drill tested, it has been underwhelming. And as you can see on the drill data map from the right, which has the same scale, so anything that's in red is above 10 ppb. What is also significant is that not all the historic surface anomalism has yet to be fully explored. After we added more data, we've found a few areas where they actually have not drill tested these gold anomalies. So the interpretation presented is focused on the drill hole database and the multi-element anomalism buried in the data. As I present an overview of this data, I just want to stress that due to the nature of the historic data, there are multiple and unknown analytical methods present, and I'm treating the data based on anomalism and not on hard statistical values. All samples that were geochemically classed as either weathered or transported have been removed from this interpretation. So any following plots or anomaly maps you look at is only looking at fresh material. Also, lithology was classed first, and then all the lithology classifications were then attributed and subdivided to assess alteration. And once alteration was identified by lithology type, element anomalism was assessed, resulting in a complete queryable data set. And then this resulting data set then defined for each assay a lithology, an alteration, and an element anomalism where the data was available. So the classification of lithologies was done on the fresh data. So there was over 25,000 data points that had enough multi-element data that you could actually classify magma series and rock types. This classification was done based on structural domain to determine any distinct characteristics of the magma. So using numerous bivariate plots, lithologies were classed based on their unique geochemical signature. The geochemical classification was checked against the log lithology, which assisted in determining sediment horizons, particularly black shale. On the western side of this project, there's 2 magma series that are present, with one trending towards more calc-alkaline. Now, there's the thorium-niobium data, which fully and 100% supports magma series. There's not enough data to actually use this data to use it, but for any of the purists in the room, and there's someone who is very adamant about this, I just want to show that with the thorium-niobium data, you can actually see you have one trend heading this way and one trend heading this way, and that those are your 2 magma series, which is hard to show from the bivariate plots. On the eastern side, very interestingly, there is a strong ilmenite fractionation trend that you can see in the vanadium-titanium plot that heads right across here. And there are 2 magma series that are also present as well. This fractionation trend tends to a more tholeiitic magma series. The second magma series is more calc-alkaline, and to sort of that more diagrammatically, using a Jensen cation plot, you can actually see that across the whole project area you have one sweeping trend, and then where the ilmenite and vanadium fractionation occurs and heads up, you get your second more tholeiitic fractionation trend. As I continue, I'm going to show a few prospective horizons. Those prospective horizons sit within this prospective lithology type, and when I presented this at RIU, I wasn't going back into the lithology, so I'm just highlighting that here. The distribution of alteration is widespread. All alteration was classed based on the individual lithogeochemical types. So as an example of one of the many plots that was used, using the alteration box plot from large shows the trend for for an intermediate group of rocks from a sericite, chlorite to sericite alteration. This is marked as trend 3 along in the diagram. The map shows the spatial distribution of alteration associated with mafic, intermediate, and felsic lithologies. Note the significant chlorite sericite to sericite distribution marked by orange and yellow dots on the map. Ultramafic and sediment lithologies are not included in this interpretation. In particular, the presence of black shales was separated out. The significant zones of alteration, particularly along this prospective horizon, extends over 20 kilometers. And the horizon links to the basalt 2 group that I pointed out earlier. So the anomalism present is difficult to correlate due to the multiple vintages of data and methods. So just a very quick note on leveling. The data that I'm about to present has not been leveled. So the reason being is that a bulk of this historic data would actually it would remove a bulk of the data and leave massive gaps in the spatial distribution. So the aim is to try and get a sense of the anomalism from the data and its spatial distribution rather than a hard, this is this value here and this is this value here. So what's most important is the presence of an element from a prospectivity view rather than the true value, and that further testing is required to actually test the validity of these targets. So just moving on from that. So due to the lack of coherent and consistent data, element anomalism was determined using crustal background values. And so anything over 10 times background is considered significantly anomalous. And the figure that I'm showing here on the right is from Scott Halley. And it may model a porphyry system, but the theory applies across all hydrothermal deposits. It's just beautiful because it's vertical as opposed to horizontal. So using the crustal abundances for a given element and assessing based on the degree of anomalism, the distribution can be mapped and used as a vector into prospective areas. The temperature gradient starts with molybdenum in the center and moving out towards thallium up at the top. So based on this approach, a significant distribution of elements associated with a VMS signature is present in the area. In each of the element maps, zinc, cadmium, silver, tellurium, tin, and thallium, the blue represents values that are below crustal abundance or at detection. The values for crustal abundance were taken from the Foregs Geochemical Atlas, which is a fantastic online library of elements. The yellow is what is crustal abundance up to 10 times background, and anything that is red is greater than 10 times crustal abundance and is considered significantly anomalous. So I just want to note the trend between zinc and cadmium. This trend is over 20 kilometers in strike. The zinc values are up to 1.45% in the mafic rocks, and silver values are up to 19.4. Anomalous thallium, which is considered indicative of galena and sphalerite at values greater than 1,000 and 5,000 ppm respectively, has reached over 5,000 ppm in spots on this map. Additionally, arsenic, lead, molybdenum, bismuth are also anomalous, and the scale is the same. Just want to note that arsenic values are up to 1.7% in areas with lead at 1,200, and the moly and bismuth get up to around 300 ppm. This combined spatial association of these 10 elements is consistent with the VMS signature. So on the western side, this 24-kilometer trend of anomalism can be seen in bivariate plots with a significant positive correlation between the zinc and cadmium. Sorry. So what I'm trying to show here is that what you see here in yellow correlates with what's in yellow on this side of the map. And going back to Scott Halley's diagram, how you had the moly sitting in the center working out towards thallium, these are actually colored in the same way. So the hottest part of your system is where this yellow is, which correlates to this bit here. So in theory, you're close to a hydrothermal source. I just want to acknowledge that there are gaps and a lack of data available in the distance between anomalous points, particularly between here and down through here, and that there is no drilling in between here, and that there could be anomalism sitting in through there as well, but someone's going to have to go and test it. So this prospective horizon, in a very positive exploration-looking way, could extend for 35, 40 kilometers all down that side of having just having a signature, alteration, and element anomalism. Not necessarily saying there's a deposit, but it's an anomaly that it is present throughout in the entire data set. So to summarize, the main VMS anomalous areas are associated with mafic lithology, chlorite sericite alteration, and at least 10 anomalous elements. And it is worth noting in the data that the gold values on their own are not part of the data, are not part of the story, but the areas of concentration in combination with the hydrothermal anomalism highlight prospective VMS areas. So you've got gold values sitting in drill data here. This is your element anomalism, with your yellow being your moly working out towards your copper and zinc, and then this is your alteration sitting in through there. So there's quite a lot going on in a small area. So what was the treasure? So previous exploration did not identify significant VMS trend, as it was not the focus. This shows how model-driven exploration for nickel missed a likely VMS hydrothermal system. This data set may not be geared for VMS targeting, but there's enough information to determine a signature at a camp scale. There's also enough information to suggest further investigation for a potential layered intrusion, which I'm just going to show in just a second. The value in this data set is that by looking at this from a mineral systems approach and letting the data speak for itself, you actually can pull out areas of interest that you can follow up on, rather than going and looking at a project and starting it again from scratch, or simply walking away from a project that has a potentially significant system hiding away in the data that you didn't actually look for. So just moving on to something different, because that talk was geared for a very specific audience and time. In the eastern part of the project, there's very interesting signature came out in doing the Lithogeochem analysis. So looking at magnesium versus chrome, there was a significant chrome values, up to 2.5%, sitting in a cluster in the data. And then you also had chrome depletion at that same value of magnesium. And this is quite different when you were thinking you were looking for nickel in your chromateites and things like that. You don't tend to get massive zones of really 2.5% chrome sitting out there. So keeping in mind what your layered intrusion would look like based on this photo on the right, this data was then spatially looked at, and it turned out that the data actually sits in two holes 300 meters apart and alternates in all the way down hole, as you can see through here and through here. And in both of these holes, there's a strong platinum-palladium correlation. On the mag map with the geology overlaying, those two holes sit through here in this horizon coming through here. This horizon bifurcates on in the map, and it comes down through here and heads down to where you have your titanium, vanadium fractionation trend sitting in a cluster of data down through here, which also has a strong copper-palladium signature. So looking at the regional distribution of palladium across the project, this is unusually consistent data, and even more so because the palladium and platinum values tend to have a 1-to-1 ratio across the whole project area. So that's 40 kilometers by about 60 kilometers where you're seeing consistent platinum palladium values. And whether or not you would always look at that or not, sometimes this was analyzed because you were looking for nickel, and so the platinum and palladium were assessed. You wouldn't normally have a platinum and palladium data set to go on to look at such a large scale. But it's different because there's people here who've probably seen more than, well, have definitely seen more than me. But from what I've seen, every time you see platinum and palladium correlate well, it tends to be proximal to a deposit. It tends to be regional. You don't tend to pull out a regional exploration data set and go, oh, look how beautiful my platinum and palladium correlate together. And as you can see here, it's a beautiful 1-to-1 correlation heading up. This correlation exists across the whole East Laverton project, and it goes from a 1-to-1 correlation around at lower values up to higher values towards the western side of the project. So is this different because it's related to some mineral process? Is this part of like a hydrothermal system? It's something that requires further work, but if you wouldn't have sat and gone through and looked at the data, you wouldn't have pulled out this relationship and gone, well, that's kind of interesting. And Is it worth looking at? Does this relate to a potential layered intrusion that's sitting there, and what might be hiding in the data? And the idea behind, is this something that's out there, is there something different out there, is to sort of take a look at what's been going on the Patterson and the new discoveries out there, and is there a different type of deposit that's sitting out here that hasn't been looked for because the data is quite different and hasn't been looked at from this scale. So, thank you.
Yeah.